Spring in Boston arrives late, but when it finally shows up, it's spectacular. Cherry blossoms lining the Charles River Esplanade in full pink explosion. Warm golden sunlight filtering through the trees that still cling to a few stubborn autumn leaves. Graduation is just 2 months away, and Julian's dad, Mr. Hargrove, has finally agreed to meet us. Not at their Back Bay townhouse, but at a classic steakhouse in Beacon Hill. Dark wood tables, soft amber lighting, the faint scent of grilled ribeye and aged Cabernet hanging in the air. He called it a family dinner, but I knew better. This was the final interview. Julian drove us there. He was quieter than usual on the ride, knuckles white on the wheel. I rested my hand on his for a second, no words. He glanced over, gave me a small smile. You don't have to perform or anything, he said. Just be you. My dad. He respects straight facts more than smooth talk. I nodded. I know. And I'm not planning on bullshitting him. The place was tucked down a narrow cobblestone street. Mr. Hargrove was already at the corner table, dressed in a perfectly tailored gray suit, silver threading through his hair, eyes the same shape as Julian's but a hell of a lot sharper and colder. He stood when we walked in, shook Julian's hand first, then turned to me. Elias, he said, voice low and solid. I've heard a lot about you. I shook his hand, met his gaze dead on. Hope it's the good stuff, sir. He gave a thin smile, not warm, more like the smile of a guy used to sizing people up on balance sheets. We sat. Dinner started with the usual, my job, postgrad plans, where my family's from. I answered clean and direct, no polish. He listened, nodded slowly, no commentary. Then he got to the point. Julian says you're the reason he's changed, he said. Eyes locked on me. I don't buy that love magically fixes people. I believe in results. So, Elias, show me the results. Why should I be okay with my son, the one who had his whole life mapped out a certain way, choosing to build something with someone like you? Julian stiffened beside me. He opened his mouth, but I slid my hand under the table, gave his hand a quick squeeze. Let me handle this. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, and opened the short PDF I'd put together last week. No feelings, no vows, just numbers. I'm not here to sell you on emotions, sir, I said. You're not that guy. I'm giving you a market analysis on Julian. I slid the phone across. 3 clean pages. Page 1, Julian's academic performance pre- and post-Marcus breakup. GPA jumped from 3.4 to 3.9 over the last 2 semesters. No more outsourcing group work. Page 2, current internship, boss's eval. Julian's shifted from short-term deal chasing to long-term sustainable growth. Revenue on the project he led beat industry benchmark by 18%. Page 3, soft skills, stress tolerance, teamwork, adaptability. Evidence from the venture capital project we did together. His model got praised by the professor for being grounded and risk-savvy in a real way. I held his stare. Julian's not the power couple version you had in mind anymore. He's better than that. He's learned to calculate real risk, not just on spreadsheets, but in actual life. He got that from me, and I've gotten better from him. If you want your son to win long-term, not flame out after a quick high, then he's on the right track. And I'm part of that track. Mr. Hargrove scrolled through the file, eyes never leaving the screen. Silence stretched. Julian's grip on my hand under the table was iron tight. Finally, he set the phone down and looked at me. You ran financial analysis to defend my son's relationship, he said. The ice in his voice had thawed a little. That's interesting. He turned to Julian. You really have changed. Not because of lost money or lost status. Because you've learned to stand on your own. And because of this man. Julian nodded. I'm not sorry, Dad. Elias isn't a replacement for Marcus. He's the guy I chose because he makes me a better version of myself. Mr. Hargrove went quiet again. Then he gave a single nod, not full endorsement, but the kind a businessman gives when the numbers check out. I'm not ready to applaud yet. But I'm not standing in the way anymore. Prove your choice was right with results, not words. He looked at me one last time. You two got a joint financial plan yet? Debt payoff? House? Retirement? We're building it, I said. 5-year horizon. Nothing flashy. Just realistic. He let out a small laugh. Good. At least my son didn't pick an idiot. Dinner wrapped up lighter after that. No big family hug. No teary blessings. Just a firm handshake from Mr. Hargrove as we left. On the drive back to Alston, Julian was quiet for a long stretch. Then his voice came out soft, a little shaky with feeling. Thanks. Not just for standing up for me, but for standing up for who I am in front of him. With data. With truth. I glanced over, smiled. I just said what was real. He pulled over on a quiet side street, turned to me. Under the sodium streetlight glow, his eyes were bright. Elias, I love you, came out quiet, but it landed heavy. I held his gaze. I love you too, I said, and we're gonna show him by living the best damn life we can. He leaned in and kissed me. Deep, slow, full of gratitude and certainty. No dodging. No more waiting. By the time we got back to the Alston apartment, it was late. We crashed on the narrow twin bed, tangled up, listening to the city settle outside the window. For the first time, family didn't feel like just baggage or distance. Could be acknowledgement, even if it came slow, even if it wasn't perfect. And with Julian next to me, I knew we'd outlast whatever shareholders were left. By being exactly who we are. That spring in Boston came with warm sun and soft breezes off the Charles. Like the city was finally exhaling after a brutal winter. We were half a semester from graduation, the diplomas still waiting to be handed out, but we'd already started mapping what came after the ceremony. Jobs were lined up, student debt was still hanging around, but the all-nighters chasing deadlines were mostly behind us. Julian had finished his internship and signed his offer letter. I'd locked in the consulting gig. We picked the rooftop of an old office building in the Seaport district. Not fancy, just a public access roof that opened to the public after hours. The view was killer. Boston's lights glittering below, the dark ribbon of the Charles under moonlight, and way off in the distance the Prudential Center, where Julian once ditched a networking mixer to duck into the convenience store where I worked. We hauled up 2 cheap folding chairs, each of us with a takeout coffee and a notebook. Julian opened his first, voice calm but solid. Let's start with the real numbers, he said. How much student debt do you still have? I flipped to the page I'd been tracking since freshman year. 42,000. Average interest 5.8%. Plan is $800 a month minimum, plus year-end bonuses. At this pace, cleared in about 5.5 years. He nodded, jotted it down. Mine's lighter, 28,000. Lower rate after I refinanced last year. I'm throwing 1,000 at it monthly. Gone in 3. We sat quiet for a minute, staring out at the city. The air was cool but no longer biting. Julian kept going. Once debts zeroed house savings. Not some overpriced Back Bay condo. A small place in the suburbs, Quincy or Somerville, 4 to 500,000 range. 20% down means we need 100 grand saved. If we each put away 1,500 a month, plus decent high-yield interest, we can hit it in 4 years. I let out a small laugh. You're already factoring compound interest? Of course, he said, eyes lighting up. Learned that from you. No fairy tales. Just math. I reached for his hand. Holding hands felt easy now, no hesitation. Retirement? Insurance? Kids? If we ever go there. He looked straight at me, no dodging. Retirement. We max the 401k match from day one at work. Target 15% of salary each. Health insurance, the companies cover most, but we grab supplemental if we need it. Kids. If we decide we want them, only after the house is secure and the finances are steady. No rush. I don't want to bring a kid into the world while we're still drowning in debt. I nodded slowly. Same. I grew up watching my parents stress over loans. If we have kids, they get a real shot, college fund, no borrowing their way through school. He squeezed my hand tighter. And we're not promising forever. We're promising this. Same direction. Same responsibilities. If one of us gets tired or scared, we say it. No hiding. No running. I studied his face under the city glow. The exhaustion that used to live there. The tight jaw, the constant second-guessing was mostly gone. He'd grown up, not in some flashy way, but in the quiet, steady way that actually lasts. And so had I. "I love you," I said, not for romance, just because it was the truest thing in that moment. He smiled, warm, real. "I love you too, because you never make empty promises. You only promise what you know you can deliver." We sat like that for a long stretch, hands linked, watching Boston pulse below us. Traffic, neon, people chasing their own dreams. But up here we had ours, not some hazy fantasy, but a clear roadmap. Julian flipped his notebook to a fresh line and wrote one last entry. Next 5 years, 0 debt, buy house, build 6-month emergency fund, start education fund, if kids. And every year, come back here, check progress. I grinned. "Like a shareholder meeting?" "Exactly," he said. "Except there are only 2 shareholders. And we don't vote, we just agree." When we finally stood to leave, he pulled me in and kissed me, short, sure, no drama. Night wind came up off the water, carrying river smell and late-blooming flowers. On the drive back to Alston, he put on an old jazz playlist, the slow saxophone stuff we used to play in my tiny apartment. Not much talking, just hands linked over the gearshift. Later, tangled up on the narrow bed, I whispered, "Thanks for planning this with me." He held me closer. "Thanks for giving me a future worth planning for." We fell asleep like that, not with grand vows of forever, but with a shared map and the quiet certainty that if the road shifted, we'd recalibrate together. Because grown-up love isn't fireworks. It's looking the same way, carrying the load side by side, and building something solid, one calculated step at a time. Graduation morning in May was one of those perfect Boston days. Bright golden sun everywhere. A few late cherry blossom petals drifting across the BU quad like confetti. The whole campus buzzed. Laughter, camera shutters clicking non-stop, mortarboards sailing into the air. The sharp smell of fresh-cut grass mixing with coffee from the food trucks parked along Commonwealth Avenue. We stood in the sea of black gowns, both clutching our Bachelor of Business Administration diplomas, thin pieces of paper that felt heavier than they looked after 4 years of grinding. Julian had actually combed his hair for once, and his smile wasn't tired anymore. It was bright, unguarded. We weren't in the same row. Our families had come separately, so we kept catching each other's eyes across the crowd, quick little glances that said everything. My dad had flown up from Florida and sat in the family section next to my mom, the woman who'd worked night shifts as a nurse for years so I could even be here. They didn't make a big scene, just held hands, eyes shiny when my name got called. Julian's dad was there too, sitting ramrod straight. He didn't clap wildly like the other parents, but when Julian walked across the stage, Mr. Hargrove gave one slow nod. Small gesture, but Julian later told me it meant more than any standing ovation ever could. After the ceremony, we found each other in the chaos. Julian reached me first, tugged me out of the knot of friends, and pulled us toward a quieter corner of the quad near the cherry trees. He lifted his phone, leaned his shoulder against mine, and snapped a picture. 2 guys in full regalia, diplomas in hand, sun blasting straight into our faces. Real smiles, no posing, no filter. "Take one more," he said, then leaned in close to my ear and whispered, "Thanks for not giving up on me back when I had nothing to offer." I turned, met his eyes. "You always had yourself. I just helped you see it." He smiled, that warm, familiar one that still made my pulse skip even after all these months. Then he dipped his head and kissed me right there in the middle of campus. Nothing dramatic, no long make-out session, just a quick, sure press of lips. Nobody around batted an eye, or if they did, nobody cared. Boston's seen plenty of guys like us. We walked out of the gate hand in hand. No sprinting toward some big future, no sweeping declarations. Just slow steps, shoulders brushing under that soft spring light. What waited ahead was the real stuff. 9 to 6 jobs, often 8 or 9, rent checks, saving spreadsheets, exhausted evenings where we still sat side by side updating the emergency fund tab in Excel. There'd be fights over money, work stress, Old wounds bubbling up when we least expected. There'd be nights when one of us would feel like letting go. But we'd already survived the graveyard diner shifts, pushing each other's cars through snowstorms, collection calls from his dad, bombed interviews, and all those times we had to swallow feelings so hard it hurt. We didn't need to say forever. We just needed to keep choosing each other every damn day. We ended up down by the Charles, at the same stretch we used to walk during fall festivals. Julian squeezed my hand. "You ready?" he asked. "Ready," I said. "Whatever comes." We recalibrate together. He laughed under his breath, then pulled me into a tight hug. River wind came up, carrying that mix of water and blooming trees. We stood there a long minute, looking out at Boston, the skyline that had watched us crash into each other, grow up and finally stick. Then we let go, laced our fingers again, and kept walking. Not an ending, just the real beginning. One that felt solid, practical, and quietly hopeful. Because our love isn't a fairy tale. Simpler, more ordinary. Two grown men who've been hammered by real life together, and who are now ready to step into the actual world. Imperfect as hell, but never alone.